Lecture 7 for Western Civ 2, HS 242, on political revolutions. As we begin today, I'd like to draw your attention to some scripture passages which informed Christian people throughout the ages as we have lived in this world, that we're called to be subject to authorities. In 1 Peter chapter 2, beginning in verse 13, we're told to submit ourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme, or unto governors as unto them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers, and for the praise of them that do well. For so is the will of God, that with well-doing you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. As free men, not using your liberty as a cloak for maliciousness, but as the servants of God. Honor all men, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. Certainly people who believe in the divine right of kings like to hearken back to passages like that, and what they found also in the book of Romans, in chapter 13 of the book of Romans, where it says that every soul is to be subject to the higher powers. There's no power but that of God, and the powers that are ordained of God. So whoever therefore resists the resists the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. I'm reading here from the King James. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain, for he is the minister of God, a revenger, to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. So Christians are called to be subject to authorities, but yet at the same time, within what we find there in Romans 13, we see that people who serve in government are ministers of God to do the people good. That'll be something that those urging change are going to be particularly focused on. Are they serving those people who are ruled, or are they just dominating them and running over them? What we see as we move on here in Western civilization, in the history of it, is we're going to see that political revolutions break out in the late 19th century, and they're going to continue on into the first half of the 19th century, and these revolutions are ignited by the political ideas that came out of the earlier thinking of the philosophers. Local dissatisfaction with government's responses to circumstances certainly provided fuel for these revolutions. But these revolutions are going to bring about dramatic changes in Europe, certainly shaping the political landscape and the boundaries of territories, but it'll come at terrific price. Something that will continue on to our day is that politics emerge as a factor in the lives of people, and politics is an area where few people are indifferent. Now, as we are thinking about Western civilization, certainly we're being focused on things in Europe, and this is where many of these ideas emerged, but those ideas were sometimes taken further afield, far across the Atlantic Ocean to the American colonies. And the American Revolution is going to be the first of these political revolutions that takes place. Now, there had been a lot of other issues that existed in England where there are people chafing to bring about changes, but the revolution first begins in the context of the American colonies. Part of this is because of the geographical situation. These colonies are located far across the Atlantic Ocean, and in that context there had been much greater political freedoms that people had enjoyed. There was greater political participation. There were more landowners, percentage-wise, and so more participants in government. Amongst these people living far away across the ocean, there had been a history of dissent. Many of them had come from people who had immigrated because of religious differences. And so they're used to discussing matters and arguing over issues, and used to living with some differences of opinion which weren't always tolerated back in Europe. Now, back in England, there had been calls for changes to the government that had existed. And the English government had succeeded with Parliament operating under Prime Minister Pitt. They had operated with George the First and George the Second, and the country had prospered. And in prosperity, it was easy not to change things. People were widely content, but the population was growing. And as population grew, sometimes there were some places that weren't politically well represented. And so as a result, you could have increasingly large towns that are growing into being cities like Manchester, which didn't have representation in Parliament. They just had the representation from the county, whereas there had been old boroughs, towns, which had been given representation in Parliament that had shrunk as people had moved from one place to another. And so in England you didn't have a very equitable system for having representation in Parliament. A fellow by the name of Wilkes is going to call for parliamentary reform. He's not a particularly pleasant person. Personally, he's kind of an ugly person if you read descriptions of him, but he certainly had a force of personality. As far as his morality, he's an immoral person. But he's going to bring to the fore the issue of freedom of press in England and the need for parliamentary reform to change the situation where there just a relatively small number of rich individuals who had large amounts of territory could control Parliament. William Pitt resigned with the coming of a new monarch in George III. And again, he succeeded in a number of things along the way, but he's going to back out, and George III is going to increasingly take over, and this monarch is going to find himself at odds with people in England, but also in the colonies, which are supposed to be loyal to him. Now, as we had ended up last time, we had seen the 7 Years' War was played out in the Americas, and what we know as Americans is the French and Indian War. It lasts until 1763. And in that context, the Americans had learned how to fight. Now, they'd sometimes been fighting in earlier times, but they learned how to fight, and to fight in some new ways, to fight in guerrilla wars. But they had fought loyally. These English colonists had fought loyally with the English, and they had won. And certainly all this territory of New France comes to be Canada. It's going to be part of the British Dominion, and there were lots of settlements after that war, and some of those arrangements that were made didn't particularly suit the American colonists. Something that was frustrating to many was their restriction on westward expansion. There's basically an agreement that along a proclamation line that would go down the mountains along the Atlantic coastline of the Appalachian Mountains, that there would be no expansion into Indian territory west of that. But yet there were many people wanting land and aspiring to have that land. That would put them at odds with the English government. The English government decides to settle certain soldiers in these colonies to enforce the rules and to protect the colonists from Indian invasions. But the colonists are expected to pay the cost for this, and primarily they need to house all these soldiers, and so there'll be various quartering acts, and this will be an offense to many people. They don't particularly want the soldiers to stop them from immigrating westward, and then they're expected to house them. And sometimes soldiers don't make the best of house guests if they sleep with their spurs on your fancy sheets. So there's going to be issues that exist here as state legislatures don't want to, they're not state legislatures, these colonial legislatures don't want to pay the price for taking care of these soldiers, which are ostensibly there to look after them and to keep the peace. The British, meanwhile, have a huge war debt. They have gained territory from the French, but they have huge debts that they've incurred, and so they need to pay off their debts. And the American colonists weren't perceived as paying their fair share of the taxes. The American colonists, quite honestly, did not pay as much per person as people back in England. And so the thought was that they would make things more equitable. And so they're looking for ways to raise taxes from these colonists. They don't want to pay any more taxes. And so there's going to be a number of different proposals that come up. The Stamp Act of 1765 is one of these acts that they come up with, whereby anything that's an official document is going to have stamps on it. So if you want to buy a newspaper, you have to pay the tax on that, and that the tax is paid on that newspaper because it has a revenue stamp that would be stuck to the newspaper showing that the tax had been paid. Anything made of paper would receive a tax. So even if you want to buy a deck of cards, I suppose you'd have a stamp tax on that. But the colonists resist this. They see that this is being unfair, and they don't want to pay this increased tax. And so they basically intimidate the would-be tax, the stamp salesman. And so this is going to be something where the British are frustrated in trying to raise money this way. They will make various other acts whereby they're going to try to raise taxes in different ways, raising taxes on different kinds of commodities, or limiting the movement of goods, so benefit things in England in a different way. But what we're seeing here overall is that there's a subordination of the American colonists' economic interests to those of the government back in England, back in Britain. This is seen most obviously in 1773 in a tea tax. The Tea Act restricted where all people could buy tea. The goal is to help the British East Indies Company survive, and people resisted this. And in response to this, we'll find that some Americans will dress up like Indians and will throw some 300 more chests of tea overboard into Boston Harbor in what comes to be known as the Boston Tea Party. This is just one act of rebellion. This is a direct act of rebellion. There's others who are going to engage in nonviolent means, where they're going to try to put economic pressure on England by not buying tea, for example. And so we have the Edenton Tea Party here, close to Elizabeth City, just a few miles to our west, where the town symbol, even to this day, is a teapot, where there you had the local ladies committing themselves not to drink tea any longer. So there's going to be a boycott. So there's a lot of economic warfare that goes on, and tensions are rising as there's different interests. But George III, the King of England, again, he's been ruling from 1760. He came to power in the midst of that 7 Years' War, and he's going to rule a long time. He's going to rule all the way up until 1820. Now, some of the later years there, he's going to have his heir ruling for him because he's mentally unstable. But he's going to have a very long rule of some 60 years before he dies. But he basically acts trying to maintain his authority, and some of his acts are seen to be directly offensive to these colonists. One, we oftentimes hear about the coercive acts of 1774, which get a great deal of negative press. But the Quebec Act, as they are incorporating Canada within the British Empire, reallots territories that these colonists thought of as being their right. When they were established as colonies, their territory extended across the American continent, theoretically. So at this point in time, for example, the state of North Carolina, where I'm currently sitting, extended here from the Atlantic coast across the Appalachian Mountains, and would include territories, for example, like Tennessee. It's only going to be after the American Revolution that the state of Tennessee is going to come into existence. Prior to that, that would have been considered Carolina. The same will hold true of other states, like Virginia. It believes that it extends further westward. And Pennsylvania believes it extends further westward. So in the Quebec Act, when the area that is basically north of the Ohio River, including all the Great Lakes, is going to be moved into the territory of Canada, into the territory of Quebec, people in Pennsylvania, people in Virginia are going to be very concerned about that because they see that as taking away territory which was their right. And it's going to limit their ability to expand to those regions. And they're concerned about this, as some of these colonies have state churches, and up here in Canada there's a lot of Catholics that are up there, and they see this as being something that's going to be problematic to them. So there's a lot of underlying causes here to bringing about an American Revolution. So we want to move from just these underlying causes to the progress of this revolution. In 1774, in response to those coercive acts pushed forward by George III and his loyal Prime Minister, we'll have the First Continental Congress, where these colonists will meet together to discuss the situation and to make an appeal for a change. The British Crown is not interested in making changes. Instead, they want to push forward their demands. And so as we come into the spring of 1775, we'll find that the first violence breaks out to the west of Boston in Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts. This will take place on April 19th, 1775. This will be the first violence that breaks out, where we have local militia taking up arms and resisting the British. The British are going to overwhelm them as they march on from Concord towards Lexington, but as they return towards Boston, they're going to be sniped at all along the way. So whereas about 40 American colonists die, there's closer to 300 British troops that die on their way back to Boston. So it's become a shooting war. People are getting to be fixed in their positions, demanding change. As we go on into 1775, we'll find a Second Continental Congress will meet. There will be extension of violence that goes beyond just up there in Lexington and Concord, close to us here in Elizabeth City. The first shots that are heard in Virginia in this war fought at Great Bridge on December 11th, 1775. We're there along Battlefield Boulevard. You can come to where there was a crossing of the river, and you have the Battle of Great Bridge. People from Elizabeth City fought in that battle and are identified at the monument that's there. While there's deaths that take place and there's violence, war is yet to be declared. The Second Continental Congress will be moved, though, to make this declaration. There have been a lot of argumentation. Some of it's done through the writing of pamphlets. Thomas Paine, not a particularly pleasant person in many ways, but he wrote an argument in a pamphlet entitled Common Sense, in which he argues that the Americans should declare independence. And eventually Henry Lee is going to propose in this Second Continental Congress that these colonies would band together and gain their independence. And in response to that, Thomas Jefferson and others are going to be working on a Declaration of Independence that's signed on July 4th, 1776. This Declaration of Independence is addressed to King George. It appeals to the political philosophy of John Locke, as it asserts that people have certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, and instead of saying property, although that's something they believe in, they say the pursuit of happiness. So this Declaration of Independence, war will be declared. Things don't look too terribly good for the American colonists in 1777, as there's a number of negatives. The British certainly have well-trained troops. They have resources, and as they're brought to bear, things look grim for the colonists. Eventually in 1777, there will be something of a turning of the tide at Saratoga, and the American colonists will be working very hard to build alliances with France and with Spain. because France and Spain have both felt the sting of defeat by the British, and they look to give the British a taste of their own medicine. So these alliances are going to be very important. These colonies work under certain articles of confederation, and as they go through years of war, there'll be some times when things look particularly grim. When in the wintertime you have American Continental forces driven out of Philadelphia, living at Valley Forge, suffering through the winter in rather inhospitable place as far as the housing and all goes, while the British are relatively comfortable during the winter in Philadelphia that they've occupied. But the Americans will bring along some changes as they recruit a fellow by the name of von Steuben to come be something of a mercenary who comes from Prussia, and he brings Prussian know-how and military organization with him, and he's going to help change the way that they operated in the American Army, where no longer would the officers trot along on their horses while the men had to stomp barefoot through the snow. The officers would walk most of the time. They'd be mounted on their horses when they went into battle, but they would walk when their men would walk. And they're going to move away from the old idea that basically the soldiers were more afraid of their officers than they were of the enemy. And so they obeyed commands because they were afraid that their officers would chew them up and spit them out. Instead, they become what's characterized as being a band of brothers, that they would be fighting for a common cause. And von Steuben helps them to increase their rate of fire by reducing the number of steps in their procedures as they line up to fire in rank and file. And this is going to help them to not suffer quite as many casualties as they've been suffering, and to develop a sense of camaraderie, which will help them recognize they're fighting for a cause, they're fighting for each other, and they have something that they're fighting for. The problem is that the population is heavily divided. Three major factions. You have those who are for this revolution, those who are loyal to the king, and then a large number in the middle that really would like to stay out of it if they could. But there's not a whole lot of space left to sit on the fence. And people who sit on the fence are oftentimes going to be shot at by both sides. This war will drag on for some time. The British will bring German mercenaries that they'll bring from Europe into this battle, so-called Hessians. And there will be a number of pivotal battles. Again, I'm going to trust that in your high school history class you've gone through some of these battles at places like Trenton, and you followed George Washington as he's chosen to be the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. The Americans are successful enough that they give the French some confidence, and the French are going to come alongside supplying some war materials, and most particularly a navy. The British had a great navy. The Americans have a naval fleet that's acting like so many privateers, like pirates, but they don't have a large number of man-of-war, large ships that would go to confront the British ships. And so the French Navy is going to be particularly important and will lead ultimately to a defeat that will take place at Yorktown on October 19th, 1781. The British move into a southern campaign where they go down to what we know as South Carolina, and then they move up through North Carolina, and they're going to win most battles, but it comes to be a war of attrition where they're being worn down, and eventually General Cornwallis will be trapped at Yorktown up in the Chesapeake Bay area, where he'll be cut off from resupply by the French Navy, and he'll be pinned in a peninsula where he can't retreat, and so eventually he'll surrender. It'll take the best part of 2 more years until the Treaty of Paris is signed, and it'll be a long time yet, all the way up until 1789, until a constitution is formalized and recognized by sufficient of these colonies. For us here in North Carolina, North Carolinians don't get to vote in the first election for George Washington as president because North Carolina was slow in ratifying the Constitution. But within this Constitution, they're going to develop a system of government where they're going to have a separation of powers. a legislative branch, a Supreme Court, the judicial branch, and the executive branch. So you're going to have a balance here which will keep there being too much power in one place. They'll decide to have a bicameral assembly. So they'll have a Senate and a House of Representatives. This is absolutely a brilliant piece of politics. You got 13 states, but they're not equal in size or in population. Well, how are they going to have representation in this Senate, in this representative body? The agreement that's going to come down to here is that each state is going to have an equal number of senators in this upper house, but that within the lower house it will be determined by population. So the larger states population-wise will have a larger representation in the House of Representatives. And so there'll be a peace that's brought about here. These states can come together where they feel like they're going to have a fair representation in the legislative branch. A couple of years later, they'll agree to the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, which we Americans know as the Bill of Rights. Under this Bill of Rights, certain privileges are clearly described. Things like freedom of the press, and the right to bear arms, and freedom of assembly, and the like. So these are going to be important steps that are made, great achievements that the Americans are going to do in establishing their system of government. The impact of this revolution is that there are many loyalists, people who've been loyal to the crown, who are going to feel uncomfortable. And they're going to be choosing to immigrate. Some of them have lost a great deal. Some have lost family members in the fight. Some have lost property. Some will, as a result, choose to move towards loyal British colonies in Canada. This will hold true also for slaves that the British emancipated, as they offered freedom to enslaved blacks who had fought alongside them. Many of them, too, will choose to move to Canada. Others will look to be repatriated to Africa, and the British will eventually create, along the coast of West Africa, there at Sierra Leone, a colony for blacks that are repatriated to Africa. The war is also going to have an impact on American Indians. These American Indians had oftentimes sided with the British, and when the British are no longer going to be there to protect their interests and limiting immigration, they're going to be concerned about that because they're going to now have to face these colonists which want to expand westward. There'll be a lot of negotiation that takes place to figure out how debts are going to be paid. A lot of debts are never paid. But the soldiers who fought are going to find that they will get paid eventually. Now, some of these soldiers fighting in the Continental Army had not ever been fed well, clothed well, been paid poorly. But one of the ways that they're going to be rewarded is by receiving a bonus of territory, of land that they can claim in various areas. So if they've signed up and fought for their state, they're going to gain territories as a reward for having fought for their nation. And this will push some expansion into new lands, sometimes at the expense of others, whether it was British loyalists or the American Indians. This war has an impact on churches, as the state church of many of these colonies was the Church of England. Are they going to continue to be under the British monarch and the Archbishop of Canterbury, or are they going to be independent churches? And so what we'll find here in the United States is that the Anglican Church, the Church of England, comes to be known as the Episcopal Church. And so today we still have the Episcopalian Church with its church government of bishops that have connections with England, but yet the church is independent of the English church. But it's interesting to think, what would have happened if there had been no revolution, if people had been less quick to go to war and to engage in violence. Amongst the American colonies, there are certainly different strategies for subsistence that exist, different economies in different colonies. And certainly the question of slavery had been one that had emerged as an issue, but it was one that they decided to bury, that they're not going to talk about for some time, because they want to hang together. They want to gain their independence. And so while they talk about liberty as a value, they don't give liberty to enslaved persons. And this will be an ongoing issue. In Britain, though, on the other side, we'll find that by 1809, William Wilberforce is going to be successful in pushing slavery out of England, making it illegal within the British Empire, and they're going to work against the slave trade around the world and particularly stomp it out in their territories as they're able to. But one of the ways they're going to do this is because they're going to expend a great deal of money to emancipate slaves, to make it possible for slave owners to recoup something of their investment. In the Americas, we're going to find that there's no political will to raise funds in such a way that they could buy out slaveholders and liberate enslaved persons. This American Revolution certainly has a great impact here, where some of us sit in the United States, sets a course for a new style of government, this American experience, this American experiment that goes on. But it's going to inspire change across Europe. Again, it's thousands of miles away here, west across the Atlantic Ocean, but it's going to inspire revolutions elsewhere. The American Revolution is directly connected to the French Revolution. And so we want to move on and talk about the French Revolution, because this revolution is going to be taken widely across Europe and have a great impact. The French Revolution has its causes, both long-term and more immediate ones. There were social inequities that certainly existed. More immediately, there were economic problems that existed. The French had supported the Americans in their war against the English, and that cost them more money. Oh, I'm sure that Louis XV probably enjoyed seeing the British squirm, but now Louis XVI's got to pay the bills. And this is a expensive war that he's been a part of. Building up the French Navy had been expensive, and the English had been able to respond to the French Navy, and it had been an expensive proposition. They borrowed money to go to this war. The economy is struggling. And then you add to that immediate causes of this revolution, namely that there's a couple of years of bad harvests, when the rains come too late, or the rains come too heavy, and crops are ruined. As a result, food prices go up. People can't afford food. There's a shortage of food that take place, and people are looking to the French monarch to help them out. This is going to lead to several steps of revolution that become increasingly violent and radical as we move along. The first phase of the French Revolution is sometimes described as the bourgeois revolution. That term bourgeois you might recognize, maybe as you've heard some Marxists speak, maybe in some movie somewhere, but it's talking about city dwellers. But these are particularly members of the Third Estate who are up and coming economically, who are prospering merchants. They're not terribly radical. They have something invested that they want to protect. They're concerned about taxation, they're concerned about inequities, but they're not looking for something dramatic as far as a change. And so they're going to be supportive of a parliament. Now, the French king has dealt with local parliaments. He has many parliaments that he deals with. And the problem in France is that there are many different laws in different regions of the country. There's not a single legislature that rules over the whole country. But it's been a long time since they've had a grand parliament, something called an Estates General. You have to go back 175 years. They have to go to the history books to figure out how to have an Estates General, where people are going to meet together and they're going to address the serious problems that they have economically. So Louis XVI is going to agree to an Estates General. He thinks that he can control it, and he's going to call them to the palace at Versailles. As they come, the different estates are represented by the first estate, that's the clergy. And so they're going to come with about a third of the representatives. I said a third of the representatives, about 300 representatives. Then you're going to have the second estate, that's the nobles. Now the clergy, just nice round numbers, we'll say that it's close to about 100,000 clergy in France at this time. Again, that's a little bit short, but nice round numbers that I'm giving you. They make up about 10% of the population. The nobility, who make up the second estate, they're close to 300 representatives, and they represent about 400,000 people. So we have 500,000 people between the first and second estate are represented. But together, they control 35% of the land. So the clergy control 10% of the land, but then the clergy also collect a tithe from people from their land. And so they collect this rather legalistically. And so they're certainly part of the way that things are established. The nobles, like the merchants, would like to see some changes. They're concerned about taxes being raised. They certainly have a lot of privileges. But coming to this Estates General will be 600 representatives of the third estate. So the third estate gets a double representation. Now what's going to happen is there's only going to be 3 votes. That's the way that they intend to do this. And so the thought is that the clergy and the nobility will hold together and outvote the third estate. But as the clergy come along here, more than 2/3 of the clergy are from the lower classes. They're from the lower clergy. They're not all bishops. They're not all the upper clergy. And they identify very strongly with the third estate and the plight of the third estate. They know what's going on in their local parishes and how people are suffering, and they see a need to bring about change. The king, Louis XVI, thinks that he's going to maintain control over these groups, but as they meet, he's not going to like the direction that things are going to take. Some of his spies will let him know some of the things that are being discussed by the third estate as they meet separately. And so they're going to come to their meeting place and find, the king's going to have a speech, and so we're going to refurbish this room right now. There's no place for you to meet, and it's rainy and miserable outside. There's no place for you to meet. It was wishful thinking to think that the ideas of the philosophes that had been embraced by many of these people from the third estate, these merchant class bourgeois, that the ideas are just going to fade because they get rained out. Their spirits are dampened a little. They look for a place to go to meet. And so what they end up doing is they end up meeting in the tennis court. Now, this is the age, again, the tennis that they're playing there is different from the lawn tennis you might see played at Wimbledon. The tennis that they play is slightly heavier ball made out of cork. And you play off the walls and out the windows and all, but it's a large open room where this game is played by nobility. And so this group's going to be able to meet in that large facility, a sports facility made there at the palace, and they're going to bind themselves together under the tennis court oath to become the National Assembly. The king isn't going to like all this that's going on, but there's going to be other things that are afoot. There's going to be other people who are unhappy. At the palace at Versailles, 14 miles out of Paris, they're away from what's going on in Paris, but they're close by. The people in Paris know something of what's going on, and things are going to become increasingly radical as people are hungry in
the city of Paris. There, in that summer of 1789, the fortress in the city of Paris called the Bastille will be stormed, and what's going to happen is that the National Assembly is going to produce its idea, its Declaration of Rights. This is not as organized a document as some of the American documents had been, but it declares many of the ideas of Jefferson as French who had fought alongside Americans. People like the Marquis de Lafayette bring ideas from the American Revolution and from Jefferson back here to France. Again, Jefferson had taken ideas from Rousseau and from Montesquieu and these other philosophers and had packaged them together. Many of those ideas get repeated here in French in the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. The situation in 1789 gets to be increasingly radicalized as people in Paris are uncertain. They're afraid that the National Assembly is going to be shut down, and as a result there's a march on Versailles. It's largely led by women, but men come to join it also, and the National Guard under the Marquis de Lafayette are going to protect this group as they march towards Versailles. The thought of these women from Paris is that if the king only knew how hard things were here, he would send aid to us and help to alleviate our sufferings. That he would help provide food for us. He'd open up the coffers where there must be food stored someplace. He just needs to know about this. So they come marching to Versailles. There is some small violence that takes place as some guards are killed along the way. But as they march into Versailles, there's a story told of Marie Antoinette, Louis XVI's wife. She's an Austrian princess. Her brother is the Holy Roman Emperor. His name is Leopold II. And she's a daughter of Maria Theresa. She's been raised in the royal Austrian household, and she's used to having her desires met. She's had a rather interesting relationship with Louis XVI, but he learns to keep her happy. And one of the ways that she's made happy is when she likes to play shepherdess, and he's basically had a little village built for her so she can play rustic peasant girl in a play village that's part of the grounds at Versailles. She's out of touch with the lives of everyday people, however. She may have some romantic notions about peasant life in a village, but she doesn't know anything about hunger and hardship. She'll come to know something about that in the time that follows. As they come, the story's told that she hears the chanting of the women coming into Versailles, and she wants to understand what's their problem. They don't have any bread, madam. Well, her response is, well, if they don't have bread, well, why don't they eat cake? They certainly rarely had a taste of cake. She's out of touch with their situation. But the royal family will be taken by the National Guard to the Tuileries Palace in Paris, and so they'll move away from the opulence of Versailles. But the National Assembly will continue to do their work. And they're going to make some changes in governance where the clergy come to be state employees and paid a salary by the state. But the church is going to lose lands that it holds. This is going to put the French at odds with the Roman Catholic Church, with Pope Pius VI. Clergy now need to be loyal to the nation. And what these bourgeois leaders, most of them are lawyers and businessmen, what they want is they want to have a situation where there's economic opportunity for them, and they're going to promote voting if you have property. So the franchise, the right to vote, is not going to be just to anybody. It's going to be to males who are propertied males. This is what they want in their new constitution. And what they want to do is, they're not looking at this point in time, they're not so radical that they want to bump off the king, but they want to have a constitutional monarchy. The problem is that this National Assembly is going to have the fact that the king's going to work against them. he's going to frustrate their attempts. So they're trying to reorganize society where, like the English, they'd have a constitutional monarchy. They'll still have a king, but his powers will be limited. He doesn't want to see a limitation of his powers. He's going to feel threatened, and as a result, Louis XVI and his family, dressed as peasants, will try to sneak out of Paris and head towards Austrian-held territory in the northeast. At the town of Varennes, they're going to be identified by a local official, and they'll be stopped. At that point, they're going to be forcibly returned to Paris, where now they've come to be clearly identified as enemies of the National Assembly. Marie Antoinette's brother, Leopold II, in his Declaration of Pillnitz, together with something of rivals in Europe, particularly in Spain and in Austria. Here, we're going to find them basically saying that they're looking to protect the monarchy here, and if anything bad happens, well, they're going to invade. This is going to further radicalize the revolution. A lot of changes have been made, but politically, we're going to find the lower class urban dwellers who weren't wearing the fancy knee breeches of these lawyers and affluent businessmen, known as culottes. The sans-culottes, sans means without in French, so those without the fancy pants are going to take over. And in 1792, in the National Convention, they're going to push forward a second constitution. In the year that follows, in 1793, we'll see the execution of citizen Louis Capet, that's Louis XVI, and his wife, Madame Capet, Marie Antoinette. This puts them at war with the Austrians, and what they're going to do is that they're going to raise large armies to try and fight this off. But it just looks like everything's going to be lost. There are political factions that are taking place, but as things spin badly out of control, they'll look for some people to get greater powers, and they'll give power to a committee on public safety. The most prominent person in this committee is going to be Maximilien Robespierre, and he's going to push forward together in this committee a number of changes. One of these is going to be that they're going to have a committee on public safety. And this Committee on Public Safety is going to mandate conscription through something in French known as levée en masse. Basically, you're going to have mass conscription. If you're an adult male, you will be fighting in war if you're going to be a good citizen of this republic. Now, beyond armies, again, that's going to be a very important thing in building very large armies, because now you have citizen soldiers who are fighting to supposedly protect those freedoms that they had in that Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, and they don't want to go back to the way things were. Some people had bought into this, particularly when they had nationalized the church lands. This is how their currency is being funded, is it's based upon the value of these church lands. And there are people who are accepting this paper currency that's based upon the value of this land. And there's concerns. Some people are concerned that that's going to hold tight. And so what we're going to find is there's going to be inflationary problems that are taking place. There's continued bad harvest for a couple of years here. And this is going to tend to radicalize the people. Robespierre and some others were not friendly to the Christian faith, and they're going to push forward a de-Christianizing agenda. This will be seen in other changes that take place, with changes in names, changes in how you measure things. You know, what basis is there for the length of the king's shoe for a measurement of distance? What they're going to embrace is a new idea based upon the decimal system, the metric system. For us as Americans, that's something of a new idea that maybe you've tried to learn along the way. But this is an old system that basically claims to be this is a reasonable system. And it's much simpler, and it's an integrated sort of system. So they're going to have centimeters and meters and kilometers and hectares, and this is a system that's all integrated. My guess is the majority of you who are listening to me here wouldn't know how to calculate an acre. How many acres are there in a square mile? Our systems get to be rather confusing when we have these different units of measure, whether it's area, there's a relationship between area and length, but they're going to have a totally integrated system. And even when it comes to measuring temperature, this is something that these scientists are looking at, they're going to come up with a system that uses the decimal. And so we have tens that are used in this system. One of the ways they're going to try to make for a more rational society is they're going to move to having 10-day weeks. They like this idea of using tens, and so they'll use 10-day weeks. But the problem is that doesn't really work into the solar calendar terribly well. So you end up with about 37 weeks of a year or less, and 36 weeks of the year. And what that means is a longer time between first days of the week when you get a rest. If you have to work 9 days before you get a day of rest, that's a new thing. But you move away from having the names of pagan gods and these sorts of things as the basis for the names of your days of the week. So there will be lots of changes in names of places, names of things, the names of months. Why would you use Roman gods' names for those months? Instead, you describe what happens in those months. Is it a hot month? We'll talk later about the month of Thermidor. Or is it windy in the spring? So in April, that would be Brumaire. It's the windy month. So you name months by the typical weather that exists in those time periods. Under the Committee on Public Safety, they will intrude into several areas that the church had formerly been involved with, where marriage becomes not so much a spiritual matter as it becomes a secular matter. It's an arrangement between people that the state has an interest in having an eye on. Not everybody's real happy about these changes, particularly in the countryside. They don't like being pushed this way and that by the city, and they'll be resistant. And the Committee on Public Safety doesn't put up with a whole lot of resistance, and the result is that they really push something of a totalitarian regime. There will be hundreds of thousands of casualties as a result. Tens of thousands of people will go to that new modern instrument of execution, more humane, the guillotine. You don't have to chop twice as you might with an axe. You get the job done all in one clear blow. The result of this reign of terror by the Committee on Public Safety is that there's a great deal of anxiety. People don't know if they're going to be denounced next. A number of famous philosophes die because they're denounced and they're beheaded as a result. So in response to the Committee on Public Safety, there will be what they call the Thermidorian reaction. In August of 1795, they will eventually come about to have a third constitution. So here, within 10 years, they've already gone through 3 constitutions, and they're not done yet. The Directorate, which will be this new system of governance, has more people vote for it. They extend the franchise to more people. So now we're seeing that more adult males, and you don't have to have those property qualifications anymore, are being able to vote. But all those freedoms that they talk about, people aren't enjoying a whole lot of those freedoms. There's not the freedom of dissent. You dissent sometimes with ideas that are roundabout. Otherwise, you might get yourself denounced. The monarchies of Europe don't like what they see going on, and so they're going to try to stop the spread of these ideas into other territories. The Grand Army of this Republic has seen some successes as they've expanded into Austrian-held territory and also into Habsburg territory in the Netherlands, the area we might know later as Belgium. they've been taking control of some of those territories. Territories that the French kings hadn't succeeded in winning in earlier wars. Louis XIV hadn't been successful in winning some of those territories, but this very large army made up of citizen soldiers is being successful, particularly as they have leaders that inspire them. The political forces in Paris are concerned, particularly about the rise of a Corsican fellow by the name of Napoleon. Napoleon Bonaparte had come from those islands of the Mediterranean and been a son of the Enlightenment and of the Jacobins, and yet he had been willing to shoot in the crowds that threatened the government. He showed his loyalty to them, and along the way he had inspired his men as he was willing to fight from the front. And yet what happens is the Directorate comes to be concerned about his growing power, and they send him off to Egypt. It's a long way away. He'll fight battles not too far away from the site of Acre, where he'll gain a foothold in Palestine and then move down towards Egypt in his Egyptian campaign. This is a campaign that's going to be particularly directed towards limiting the British. They want to control Egypt, and in his battle at Abu Qir in 1798, he'll face Lord Nelson. The French Navy forces that support them will be defeated, and Napoleon is going to have to sneak back into Paris, back to France. So the French are going to be defeated in Egypt. Some of the treasures that they had collected along the way will be taken into custody. Amongst the things that they had found as they were digging fortifications on the Rosetta distributary of the Nile was a stone, a trilingual stone, with hieroglyphs and Greek also on it. They could translate the Greek, which is still a known language, but this would prove to be the key to understanding hieroglyphic writings on the temple walls there in Egypt and on the walls of the tombs of the pharaohs. In 1799, Napoleon takes power from the Directorate. Subsequently, he's going to have a plebiscite. This is where all the people vote, at least all the male voters vote. And in the process, he's going to establish something that people call Bonapartism. That is, he gets free people to vote away their freedoms. They're looking for a strong guy, and this guy is the military leader who inspires them, inspires their armies, who's been successful when so many other leaders haven't been successful. He can protect the gains that they've made when it looks like the monarchies of Europe are marshalling forces against them and all they've gained is going to be lost. And so he has widespread support of the people of France. One of his first orders of business is to make peace with the church. Many people who had been Catholics in France, and so his first order of business as he comes to power is to come up with the Concordat, a peace with the Pope in Rome, with Pope Pius VI. He will recognize that Catholicism is the national religion of France. The terms of this Concordat are going to last pretty much for 100 years, all the way up into the early years of the 1900s. We have to wait till then for the Catholic Church to be disestablished in France. He's going to establish a new set of laws under the Code Napoleon. This is something he's going to succeed in doing. Again, the French kings previously had all these different laws in all these different territories. He's going to make a single law which all French citizens are going to be under. There's supposed to be equality before the law. But the Code Napoleon is going to have an impact on various places in where the French have influence over time, because unlike the American situation where you're innocent until you're proven guilty, Under the Code Napoleon, you're basically presumed to be guilty until you can prove yourself innocent. So the burden of proof lies on the defense rather than on the prosecution. So this will be a difference between French law and French colonies and that which will be in British colonies. Napoleon aspires to spread his ideas, the ideas of the Enlightenment that he thinks are so blessing France, and he looks to enlarge his own glory also. But he has wars to fight. He needs money to fight these wars. He believes that the ideas he has will eventually win out. He sees himself as having allies in the area of the United States. He's going to find himself in an interesting predicament, as there'll be slaves in places like Haiti where fantastic amounts of money are raised from the sugar that's grown there. So he's going to be suppressing people who hold some of his values. But Napoleon will sell the Louisiana Territory to the American colonies here at the time of Jefferson's presidency. There's questions that exist about the legality of this purchase. When we look at it today, it's just pennies on the acre. But it is a fabulous purchase that's being made here that is going to help build the United States. But Napoleon thinks that he has friends in the Americas, and that he can certainly use the millions of dollars that he gets, and he can also use the goodwill in the Americas. So the enemy of his enemy, the Americans are the enemy of the British, and so he thinks that with them he can find a common cause, and this is going to lead to a lot of tensions between America and Britain and America and France in the years that follow. So for the next decade or so, next actually almost 15 years, there's going to be economic tensions that exist between the United States and France and Britain. The English are going to look to use their navy to win an economic war against the French. The French armies, there's no other armies in Europe that can match the French for numbers because of their way that they conscript soldiers. Their soldiers believe in their cause. But the English are the 22 miles across the English Channel from France. They can't march their armies over there, and the English navy is superior with superior guns on their ships. So an invasion is going to be very, very difficult. The French cannot accomplish a land invasion. So they instead embark on something known as the Continental System. Napoleon expands his territory northward, expanding into a conquest of Europe, defeating the Prussians and the Austrians at battles at Austerlitz and Jena, moving on northward to the Battle of Friedland, moving southward against the Spanish in 1808. He essentially conquers Europe and creates a unified, well, it's not so terribly unified, but a singular territory that recognized him as the emperor that's bigger than the territory of Charlemagne back around the year 800, 1,000 years earlier. So he expands across Europe. But he can't defeat the English because the English navy has defeated the French navy at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. True, Lord Nelson, the great admiral, had been killed in the process, but the French navy had been devastated. He doesn't have the navy he needs to invade the English. He doesn't have the ability to fight their maritime empire. He's got a great set of land forces, but the English aren't invading Europe at this point in time. So how is he going to beat them? Well, one of the ways is going to be economical. That is, he's going to fight through what he calls the Continental System, where he's going to cut Europe off from England. And the thought is that if he cuts England off, if they have no place where they can export their goods, then there's going to be a revolution that takes place. Those English workers are going to find themselves hard put. They're going to be unemployed. and they're going to recognize that, hey, they want the same freedoms that the French Revolution is promising the people in France. And so they'll rebel and they'll get rid of their king too. Napoleon's empire has its problems because not everybody buys into this continental system. The Russians are under pressure to comply, but they continue to trade with the English. And so as a result, in 1812, Napoleon will embark on a campaign that heads towards Moscow. Unlike Hitler and others at later times, we're going to find that he's going to succeed in capturing Moscow. But while he captures Moscow, the Russians practice a policy of scorched earth. They burn up resources. So he marches into Moscow, he captures Moscow, he can be there in St. Basil's church and enjoy all those strange-looking structures that are there. But come winter, there's no food to be had. The French armies, the Grand Army of the Republic, is going to have to retreat. And as they retreat through a cold Russian winter, they're going to be devastated as they're picked off along the way, and as they suffer privations and they starve to death and they freeze to death in the cold. The army will be diminished dramatically. The result will be that when the Prussians rebel against him at Leipzig in 1813, his army will be defeated. They'll fall back towards France. In 1814, he'll take exile to the island of Elba. Now, Napoleon has dramatically changed Europe. He's changed the boundaries. Some little territories are going to be lost in the process. But he's oftentimes installed his own family members as new nobles. So in Germany, for example, you have his brother Jerome. Well, while they came espousing the ideas of the French Revolution, the idea of freedoms and liberty, what it came to smell like a whole lot was French domination. And so, inspired by the ideas of French Revolution, we're going to find that there's going to be the growth of national identity, where people don't want to have some French-speaking person ruling over them when they typically speak German and they have different heritage. They would rather be ruled over by German-speaking peoples. And so this will be something that's going to contribute to the great force of nationalism that we're going to see develop here in Europe in the 1800s. Napoleon is going to be fighting against this new movement that emerges. It's something that had made France strong. It's going to make these other countries come to have a national identity, something that they'll rally around and something that they're willing to die for. In 1814, he took exile to Elba. The English and others are willing to see him go. They don't want to make a martyr out of him. And so he instead takes up the position of ruling over this little island off the coast of Italy. It's not a significant great territory, and he's out of the picture. But in France, the relatives of Louis XVI try to turn back the clock. Some of the nobles want to turn things back the way they had been before. And so they're going to try to restore the French monarchy. And that's going to lead to a great deal of hostility. People look towards Napoleon to come and rescue them. And so in 1815, he'll leave exile, and troops will flock to him. But an alliance of troops between the English and the Austrians will defeat him at the Battle of Waterloo. They're north of France. And Napoleon, being defeated this time, will not be taken into voluntary exile. Instead, the British will take him to the most obscure place they know, to the island of St. Helena, located between South Africa and South America. There he will live for a number of years together with his wife, and perhaps dies under some suspicious circumstances some years later. But Napoleon's grand empire is going to crumble. But Napoleon is very significant as he's taken the ideas of the French Revolution, and particularly French nationalism, and put it on display across Europe. The result is that this has brought about a great deal of political and social change. around Europe, people are identifying with their nation. And yet those ideas of the French are going to resonate amongst people. That we could have newspapers where we can have freedom of the press, we can express our ideas, we can disagree. These wars certainly had a devastating impact on large numbers of soldiers who were casualties. But at the same time, they would also stimulate business as they're building war materials, whether it's the ships that they're building for the English, or the military equipment, the bayonets, the guns, the gunpowder that's being used in the weapons of the day. There's quite a bit of economic stimulus that comes even in the midst of this warfare, and people are learning how to do things in different ways than they had before. It's going to promote business, and the Industrial Revolution that we're going to see is going to take off in England. As there's going to be growing prosperity there, perhaps some of the social discontent is allayed. There will be social discontent there. Napoleon had produced some hardships in Europe, in Britain, but the forces of the military had crushed rebellions that had taken place, and the so-called Peterloo Massacre. There's a group of people who were unhappy with things in France, but yet they had been suppressed. And in victory, the British are going to enjoy a situation where there's going to be improved economic conditions that's going to perhaps help make people a little bit more content with the way things were, and the quality of life will improve in certain ways. But what we're going to find is that throughout the 1800s, that the ideas of the French Revolution are going to resonate amongst the British, and they're going to see increasing participation in government. It'll take a long time. Particularly, we're going to have to wait till the 1830s before we see significant parliamentary reform. Those parliamentary reforms that people like John Wilkes had been agitating for back there in the 1850s and 1860s. Napoleon's advance across Europe upset a whole lot of the old traditions, a lot of the political entities. And so in the aftermath of Napoleon's push across Europe, what we're going to find is political boundaries are going to change. Previously, as we began this semester, we saw that the Holy Roman Empire was made up of about 300 little Germanies, little political states which were theoretically subject to the Holy Roman Emperor. With Napoleon, a lot of those little political entities had disappeared. So what we're going to find in Europe is that we're going to go from about 300 political entities down to less than 40. Many of the boundaries of these new nations that are emerging are going to be familiar to us as we look at the map today. So political boundaries are being shaped, and all these little countries are coalescing together to make larger entities that we'd recognize today. So Napoleon changes Europe in many ways. He spreads these ideas of the Enlightenment, the idea that people have some say in government. That's going to be very attractive. Now, the conservative forces are going to try to resist this. They're going to try and turn back the clock, as if Napoleon had never been there. We're going to find the so-called Concert of Europe, orchestrated by Metternich, the leading figure of Austria, is going to try and turn back the clock using the principle of legitimacy. They will reestablish a constitutional monarchy here in France. So they'll establish that constitutional monarchy that they'd resisted at earlier time. But what we're going to find is that the French are going to chafe when these kings try to reassert the old monarchical power and restrict the freedoms of the people. And there'll be incremental change that will take place here until eventually we're going to find that one of Napoleon's relatives is going to be able to reassert power in France and establish another republic. The political changes that we have in Western civilization today Many of them are inspired by the ideas of the philosophes from earlier on, but those ideas were put into practice here in the American and French revolutions. People got to see what things could be like. And this changes Europe. There's a lot more political discourse. What kind of society would we like to have? What would be an equitable society? What would be a superior society? We're going to find there's going to be lots of discussions that go on, and some of that's going to be repressed, and then there's going to be more revolutions that get to be inspired, particularly as we come up to the year 1848. There are revolutions that are going to break out all across Europe as people take these ideas that have been planted earlier, ideas that get somewhat suppressed, but by 1848, revolutions break out all across Europe as these ideas burst forth. In recent times, we've had something that people have called the Arab Spring. Again, it's taken more than just one season of the year. It's gone now more than 1 year. But there are revolutions that happened all across the Arab world. What we see in Europe in 1848 is revolutions are going to spring across the whole of Europe in 1848 that are inspired by these ideas and the values of the French Revolution, which are based upon those ideas of the philosophes and the Enlightenment. The ideas that go back there to John Locke and the like. I hope you have a whole lot of fun thinking about what's most significant about this time period and how that's shaped Western civilization, and that my rehearsing some things that perhaps you've known about from your American history class are brought together with what's happening in Europe. Have fun discussing things this week.